What type of individual would ignite their own communities solely to deprive, bewilder, and demoralize an invading force? In the spring of 1462, Mehmed II, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire and conqueror of Constantinople, initiated a military campaign into Wallachia, with the goal of crushing the resistance led by Vlad III Voivod of Wallachia, historically known as Vlad Tepes or Vlad the Impaler. What the Sultan encountered was not a conventional army poised for battle in open terrain, but a devastated and barren land, deliberately ruined by its own ruler. As the Ottoman army advanced from across the Danube into Wallachia, they entered a desolate region. According to contemporary accounts, including the writings of the Byzantine chronicler Laonikos Chalkokondyles, Vlad mandated the systematic destruction of crops, water sources, and entire settlements. Homes were set ablaze, granaries were emptied or demolished, and livestock was either slaughtered or driven away. This was not mere savagery. It was a calculated act of strategic defiance. Vlad recognized that his forces, significantly outnumbered by Mehmed's estimated 90,000 troops, stood no chance of victory in a traditional conflict. Consequently, he transformed Wallachia itself into a weapon. Entire populations were either evacuated or annihilated in the path of the Ottoman forces, ensuring that the enemy would find no refuge, no provisions, and no intelligence. A letter penned by Vlad himself to Matthias Corvinus of Hungary in 1460 details this tactic with stark clarity. "I have killed peasants, men and women, old and young. We have burned down everything." This document, preserved in the Hungarian National Archives, is one of the rare, first-hand records where Vlad unreservedly describes his scorched earth campaign. The strategy proved effective. Ottoman troops, unfamiliar with the topography and suffering from illness and starvation, found themselves in a hostile territory devoid of resources. Morale began to erode. Reports indicated that soldiers abandoned their posts out of fear. Their ranks diminished not through combat, but by sheer exhaustion, hunger, and despair. This was not the style of warfare the Ottomans were accustomed to. It was annihilation without direct engagement, and it represented merely the commencement. Severed heads displayed on pikes at the fortress entrances. At the core of Vlad Tepes' unwavering resistance against the Ottoman Empire lay a deliberate application of psychological warfare. As Mehmed II's army advanced into Wallachian territory in the summer of 1462, they encountered more than just a ravaged landscape. Upon reaching the fortifications protecting Wallachia's interior, particularly the citadel of Târgoviște, they were met with a chilling and unequivocal warning: thousands of symbolic remains mounted on tall wooden stakes. This tactic, corroborated by multiple contemporaneous sources, including the dispatches of the Venetian ambassador to Buda and Ottoman chroniclers such as Tursun Bey, was intended not only to repel invaders but to incapacitate them with terror. At the gateway of Târgoviște, a meticulously arranged forest of the impaled awaited the Sultan. However, the figures placed on stakes outside the fortress gates served a distinct symbolic purpose. These were not trophies of nobility, but of captured Ottoman soldiers, scouts, and even diplomatic envoys whose punishments had been deliberately orchestrated for maximum psychological impact. Some of the displayed figures belong to high-ranking Ottoman messengers dispatched by Mehmed before the invasion. According to a 15th century Saxon chronicle from Brasov, Vlad punished these envoys after they refused to remove their turbans in his presence, citing religious observance. Vlad reportedly retorted, "Then let them be nailed to their heads in respect of their customs, and had their turbans affixed before presenting them on stakes." While the precise wording cannot be verified, the incident is documented in both Saxon and Slavic sources, highlighting Vlad's zero tolerance for perceived defiance. Beyond the fortress gates, roads leading to significant towns such as Bucharest and Târgoviște were also lined with stakes bearing gruesome remains. Some freshly positioned, others weathered by time. Ottoman soldiers reportedly recoiled in horror and contemporary. Ottoman chroniclers conceded that even the seasoned warriors in Mehmed's army were deeply disturbed by the spectacle. Impalement, Vlad's signature terror tactic. For Vlad III of Wallachia, known to his contemporaries as Vlad Tepes, meaning the Impaler, impalement was not merely a form of punishment. It was a tool of statecraft, a performance of authority designed to instill fear in adversaries, enforce discipline among his own populace, and establish his rule in a region perpetually contested by empires. Impalement, as a method of execution, was not invented by Vlad. It existed in various forms throughout the medieval world, including within the Ottoman Empire itself. Nevertheless, Vlad refined it into a public spectacle of calculated intimidation. Ottoman, Saxon, and Slavic chroniclers universally record how Vlad utilized impalement on an unprecedented scale during his reign. From 1456 to 1462, the procedure involved driving a long wooden stake through a person's body, typically starting from the lower torso and upward, sometimes exiting through the upper body. Those subjected to this punishment were placed on the stake while still alive, and the stake was deliberately shaped to prolong the agony. The victims could remain in this state for hours or even days. Vlad's officials took care to arrange the figures in deliberate rows, formations, and at varying heights, creating what foreign observers described as entire forests of impaled bodies. One of the most thoroughly documented instances of mass impalement occurred in 1462. As Sultan Mehmed II's forces approached Târgoviște, chroniclers such as Antonio Bonfini and Laonikos Chalkokondyles describe how Vlad ordered the display of approximately 20,000 captives, primarily Ottoman prisoners, but also some Wallachian subjects accused of disloyalty. These bodies were positioned on stakes outside the city with deliberate symmetry. The sheer magnitude of the punishment was intended to confront Mehmed directly as he neared the capital. The Ottoman sources confirm the psychological impact. Tursun Bey, a historian present during Mehmed's campaign, recorded that the Sultan halted his advance upon witnessing the field of impalements and was visibly unsettled by what he saw. Mehmed, accustomed to warfare, reportedly remarked that one could not vanquish a man who treated his enemies and his own people with such extreme severity. Yet, impalement was not confined to periods of war. Vlad regularly employed this punishment within Wallachia to maintain discipline and to punish theft, deceit, and treachery. Even minor transgressions could result in impalement if Vlad perceived the violation as a threat to order. According to a report by the Saxon chronicler Michael Behaim, Vlad once condemned a woman to this fate for fabricating a story about her husband's labor to evade work, an action he considered a menace to civic virtue. To his adversaries, impalement was terror. To Vlad, it embodied justice, order, and dominance. Mutilated and sent back home, Vlad's brutal warning to the Sultan. During the relentless campaign of 1460 Vlad Tepes, voivod of Wallachia, confronted the advancing Ottoman Empire not only with scorched earth tactics and forests of impaled executions, but with an even more personal form of psychological warfare, the deliberate disfigurement and release of selected Ottoman captives. These survivors were not spared out of compassion. They were transformed into walking warnings, living emissaries intended for Sultan Mehmed II, according to contemporaneous chronicles, including Slavic sources compiled in the Skazany o Dracul Vovod, the tale of Prince Dracula. Vlad conspicuously disfigured Ottoman prisoners before setting them free. Eyes were damaged, noses and ears were removed, and others were permanently scarred or had their limbs impaired. These actions were not impromptu acts of cruelty, but meticulously planned punishments, intended to terrorize the Sultan's forces and erode morale. Beyond physical harm, Vlad reportedly humiliated prisoners before sending them away. According to 15th century Slavic texts, he sometimes branded captives with hot irons or etched symbolic shapes into their skin, punishments that merged bodily torment with cultural derision. Some historians interpret these as acts of religious provocation toward Muslim prisoners, although this perspective is not consistently supported across all sources. This strategy mirrored Vlad's broader use of terror as a form of deterrence. Unlike executions, which concluded a message, these scarred survivors were spared not to live freely, but to instill fear in others. Their altered appearances spoke louder than any written decree could convey. To Mehmed II, who had conquered Constantinople just 9 years prior, this cruelty represented an affront not only to military custom, but to imperial pride. A ruler who returned his enemies in pieces was asserting, without diplomacy or restraint, that he feared no retaliation. Vlad's maimed captives were not accidental outcomes. They were declarations. They returned not as combatants, but as evidence of the impaler's resolve. Vlad Tepes wielded terror with a cold precision that resonated far beyond 1462, reshaping Balkan resistance and compelling even Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, to falter. His scorched earth, forests of stakes, and mutilated envoys remind us how power can transform cruelty into strategy, fear into policy. Which of Vlad's tactics do you believe most undermined Ottoman morale? Scorched villages, displayed captives, or marked survivors? Comment below. Ultimately, the message was not engraved in stone. It was left to fade on the stake,